The night the Alpha King came to Ashwood Pack, nobody slept. Word had traveled fast, the way all frightening things do in a wolf pack. It moved from mouth to ear through the trees, through the stone corridors of the compound, through the kitchens and the training yards, and the sleeping quarters, until every single soul knew King Calum Drace was coming, and the oracle had spoken a name. That name was Seraphina Voss. She was in the kitchen when Elder Mara found her. Seraphina was drying a clay dish with a folded cloth, her silver eyes calm, her dark hair pinned loosely at the back of her neck. She looked like she always looked, steady, quiet, like someone who had decided a long time ago that panic was not worth the energy. Mara stepped into the kitchen and closed the door behind her. Her hands were trembling. She was one of the oldest wolves in the pack, a woman who had lived through droughts and wars and power shifts, and yet her hands were trembling. She told Seraphina everything. Seraphina set the dish down gently on the wooden shelf. She did not drop it. She did not step back. She was quiet for a moment, and then she looked at Mara and said, very simply, that she understood. Mara stared at her. She had expected tears, or questions, or at the very least the kind of wide-eyed silence that fear produces. What she got was Seraphina nodding, removing her apron, and asking if she had time to wash her face before the king arrived. Mara said yes, barely an hour. Seraphina went to wash her face. Outside, Alpha Harwick was pacing the length of the main hall with his hands behind his back. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a deep voice built for authority. Tonight that voice had gone thin at the edges. He stopped Mara in the corridor and grabbed her arm and told her in a low, urgent tone that Seraphina had to accept. That there was no world in which a wolf of no rank, a packless Omega with no wolf form of her own, said no to the king of all territories. That refusing him was not bravado, it was ruin. It was the kind of thing that ended not just one life, but all the lives around it. Mara looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes that Harwick could not name. Then she pulled her arm free and walked away without answering. Harwick stood alone in the corridor and felt, for reasons he could not explain, more afraid than before. The clearing was lit with iron torches by the time the king arrived. 200 wolves gathered in the stone-ringed space beneath the great open sky, and the moon above them was red and swollen, heavy with the particular light that came only one night a year on the night of the blood moon ceremony. It was the sacred night when fated bonds could be spoken and claimed, when the old laws allowed a king to walk into any pack territory and name his mate. Seraphina stood near the back of the crowd. She had dressed in a simple gray dress, no jewelry, no ceremony. She looked like herself, which was the only thing she had ever known how to look like. The king entered the clearing from the east path, and the crowd responded the way crowds always do in the presence of real power. They went quiet. They turned. Several wolves lowered their chins without meaning to, their bodies obeying instincts older than choice. King Calum Drace was exactly what the stories said, tall, with a face that had been built from hard weather and harder decisions, dark eyes that moved over the crowd, with the precision of someone accustomed to reading rooms, measuring threats, calculating distances. He wore no crown. He did not need one. Power sat on him like a second skin, natural and heavy and everywhere. His 12-man escort fanned out along the edges of the clearing. Beta Dax stood one pace behind and to the left of the king, watching everything with the quiet attention of a man trained to notice the thing everyone else misses. Calum walked into the center of the stone ring. His eyes swept the crowd once, methodically, and then stopped. He found her. It happened the way it always happens with a fated bond. Not gradually, all at once, like a door opening in the middle of your chest. He went still. She felt it too. The warmth, the strange recognition, the pull that had no name in any language but that every wolf understood in their blood. She met his eyes and did not look away. He walked toward her. The crowd parted before him the way water parts around stone. He stopped 2 feet from her and looked at her for a moment. Actually looked. And then he spoke the words of the ritual claim. He told her she had been chosen. He told her the oracle had confirmed the bond. He told her she would come with him. She would stand beside him as queen of all territories. She would be honored and protected for the rest of her life. He did not ask. In 28 years, in every territory, In every room he had ever entered, Calum Drace had never had to ask. The clearing was so quiet that the torches could be heard crackling. Serafina listened to every word. She let him finish. She gave him that courtesy, the full hearing, without interrupting. And then she tilted her head very slightly to one side, and she smiled. It was not a defiant smile. It was not a performance. It was the small, honest smile of a woman who has already thought something through, all the way to the end, and has made her peace with it. She said no. One word, quietly spoken, without anger and without apology. The clearing erupted. Not in shouting, but in the particular chaos of 200 people trying to process something their minds had no framework for. Gasps. A cry from somewhere in the back. The sound of Alpha Harwick making a short, strangled noise beside Elder Mara. Several wolves stepped back, as if the ground itself had shifted under their feet. Beta Dax's hand moved toward his weapon before Discipline caught it and held it still. Calum did not move. He stood completely still and looked at her, and something crossed his face that no one in his court had ever seen there before. Not rage. Not cold calculation. Something much more unfamiliar. Something that looked almost like confusion. He leaned in, just slightly, and asked her, very quietly, why? Serafina kept her smile. She told him that she did not doubt the bond was real. She could feel it herself, the warmth and the pull, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. She told him she did not doubt that he was exactly who he said he was. A king, a powerful one. But she said that she would not begin a life, and especially not a queen's life, by being claimed rather than chosen. The bond between two people, she said, should be the beginning of knowing each other, not the end of it. If he wanted to know her, she was willing to be known, but she would not be taken. Then she stepped back, politely, the way you step back at the end of a conversation that has reached its natural close. The silence that followed was enormous. And then Calum turned, walked back to the edge of the stone ring, and in a voice low enough that only Dax could hear, he said they were staying the night. Dax stared at him. He had followed this man through 3 wars, across 11 territories, into rooms where the air itself felt like it was trying to push them out. He had never once seen his king choose to stay anywhere he had not already won. He said nothing. He nodded, and passed the word down the line. The crowd dispersed slowly, in fractured, murmuring groups. Alpha Harwick found Serafina near the east path, and walked beside her in urgent, low-voiced instructions. He told her she had made a terrible mistake. He told her there was still time to correct it, to go to the king tonight, to explain that she had been overwhelmed. He told her the pack could not absorb the consequences of what she had done. Serafina listened. She thanked him for his concern, and she meant it. Then she went to her room and lay down and closed her eyes. She did not sleep immediately. She lay in the dark and felt the pull of the bond moving through her like a slow current. She was not unmoved by it. She had been honest with the king about that, but she had also been honest with herself, for a long time, about what she would and would not accept as the shape of her own life. The pull was real. That did not make it a command. Calum stood at the tree line for a long time. Dax eventually came and stood near him without speaking, which was what good lieutenants do when there is nothing useful to say. After a while, Calum said out loud that he did not know what to do with a person who was not afraid of him. Dax said that was probably the most honest thing he had heard his king say in years. Calum looked at him. Dax looked at the trees. They stood in silence for another hour. At the edge of the compound, in her small house with the green door, Elder Mara sat in her chair by the window and pressed one closed fist to her mouth. She was not crying. She was not afraid. She was sitting with something she had carried for 22 years, a secret heavy enough to reshape a life, and she was feeling, for the first time, the faint and fragile lightning that comes when you realize the thing you were protecting has grown strong enough to protect itself. 3 hours after the ceremony, the blood moon reached its highest point. Every wolf on the compound felt it at the same moment, not through their ears, through their bones, a warmth, a pressure, a frequency that was older than language, older than territory, older than any king or any pack structure anyone living could remember. It was not like dominance, which always comes with an edge. This was something different. It had no edge at all. Wolves came out of their houses without meaning to. They found their feet carrying them back toward the clearing, and they followed, because the feeling was not frightening. It was simply irresistible. The way the right answer to a question you have asked your whole life feels irresistible when you finally hear it. Serafina woke. She had felt this before, in smaller ways, her entire life. A warmth she could not locate. A sound she could almost hear, like a song playing one room over with the door closed. Tonight the door was open. Tonight it was loud and clear and close. She got up. She walked to the clearing. She did not hurry. They were already there. Calum, Dax, Harwick, Mara. 200 wolves, standing in loose and wondering silence under the red moon. The light in the center of the ring changed. It did not dim. It became something more than light. It gathered, and deepened, and took on a weight that made the air feel thick and significant. And then it took a shape. Not quite a figure, not quite a face, something between and beyond, moving like silver flame and like still water at the same time. A voice came from it, not through the air, from inside the chest, from somewhere behind the lungs. Every wolf in the clearing heard it at once. The voice spoke to all of them, but it was looking at Serafina. It knew her. The recognition in it was ancient and enormous, and utterly without judgment. The moon goddess spoke plainly. She said Serafina was not born to the Ashwood Pack. She was placed there, hidden there, 22 years ago, when the last of a bloodline older than the Alpha King's throne, and older than the territorial laws they all lived under, was nearly destroyed by people who feared what it meant. One child had been saved and hidden among ordinary wolves by two women who loved something more than their own safety. Serafina was the last of that line. She did not carry the standard wolf bond. She carried what had existed before it, the original covenant between wolves and the divine, written before any king had claimed any land, before any oracle had named any name. Her wolf had never been absent. It had simply been of a different order. It could not be called by hierarchy or dominance. It answered only to truth, and to genuine choice, and to the voice now speaking to her across the still air of the Red Moon clearing. The oracle that had named Serafina as Calum's mate had not been wrong, but it had been incomplete. The voice of the goddess made the rest clear. Serafina had not been marked to be claimed by a king. She had been marked as the one whose presence would complete a king, if he proved capable of being completed, if he could learn to receive rather than take, if he could stand before someone and choose, truly choose, rather than simply arrive. The title of true queen was not a gift a king could give. It was written before any king existed. Then the presence began to recede. The light softened back into ordinary moonlight. The air thinned. The clearing breathed. No one spoke. Calum stood motionless for a long moment. His face held something new, something that did not look like the face of a king processing information. It looked like the face of a man standing on ground that had just shifted and choosing, very carefully, where to place his next step. He walked to Serafina. He stopped in front of her. Not 2 feet away this time. Closer. Close enough for her to see that his hands, at his sides, were not entirely steady. He said that he had come to Ashwood tonight to take something. He said her answer, the quiet words she had spoken without anger or apology or fear, had done something to him that years of war had not managed. He said he did not know how to be chosen. He had never been taught that. He had been taught only how to conquer, and the space between those two things was wider than any territory he had ever crossed, and he did not know if he could cross it. But he would like to try. He waited. He did not reach for her hand. And Serafina looked at him for a long moment. She read his face the way she read most things, carefully and without hurry. She found what she was looking for, not perfection, not certainty, just honesty. The plain, uncomfortable honesty of a person who has just been shown something true about themselves and has not looked away from it. She nodded. Not yes to a claim, not submission, not surrender, just yes to the beginning. Before first light, Elder Mara told Serafina everything. The 2 women who had hidden her. The night of fire and fear that had preceded it. The green door and the quiet kitchen, and the 22 years of watching a child grow into someone who had never needed to be told what she was worth. Mara wept once, briefly, and Serafina held her hand. When the sun began to rise behind the eastern trees, Serafina walked out into the early gray light alone. The compound was still, the air cool and new. She stood in the grass at the edge of the clearing, and then something happened that she had never forced, never practiced, never been able to explain. She shifted, not with pain, not with effort, as naturally as breathing, as quietly as a thought that has finally found its words. She became what she had always been. Silver white and large and still, standing in the pale morning, with her eyes the same silver they had always been, seeing the world now the way it had always looked, to the part of her she had not yet had access to. Calum was at the far edge of the clearing. He saw her. His wolf, the great dark animal that had made packs and enemies alike step back for 20 years, did something it had never done before in its life. It lowered its head, not in defeat, in recognition. The way you bow to something real. They walked into the trees together as the red moon finally set. Not side by side, like a king and a queen moving toward a throne. Like two people at the beginning of something true, carrying no titles between them yet, only the weight and the lightness of a real choice, freely made. Behind them, at the edge of the clearing, Beta Dax turned to Alpha Harwick, with the look of a man who had witnessed something he would spend the rest of his life trying to find the right words for. He said, very quietly, that she had really just said no. Harwick closed his eyes. He let out a long breath. She really had.